Hi folks, today's project we're experimenting with aeration. Now I've done a video in the past showing a side-by-side comparison with one of my grow beds in the dome, showing aerating plants versus not aerating them, and there's a huge difference with them. However, I'm just guilty of being lazy with the current greenhouse and haven't done any aeration in my deep water culture bed, and I'm definitely suffering the consequences with it, with some root rot this year. We've had a little bit warmer weather, so the water's been warmer, and I've really been hit pretty hard with that. So we're going to try to get that resolved. This experiment is using some Venturis to help aerate the water. I've seen them used in fish tanks to help aerate the water in the fish tank and in line with other plumbing, but the way I'm doing it here, I don't think I've seen it done, but I could be 100% wrong. Now I know a lot of people are going to ask, how come I'm not going to be aerating with air stones or some of this nano bubble technology or some other methods? And I have a couple of goals with this. One is I wanted to keep this fairly cheap, also cheap to operate, and also I wanted to come up with a way to circulate the water a little bit better in the beds. I've seen even with when I did aerate with air stones, it just creates essentially a column of movement water around the air stones, so you really aren't getting good movement through it. So the premise of this is that I can get a aeration into the system and then push it around a little bit more so the water can circulate well around the roots and whatnot. So I'm going to take you on a few steps of how this was designed. I'm not going to go into super detail like I did on the strawberry hanger project. So we're going to cover this whole thing in one video. I already know the outcome of it, so it makes it much easier for me to film and piece everything together. Another note is that I did have to buy some test equipment, and this was pretty expensive to purchase, not something that I normally would have done. And the YouTube revenue does not cover the expenses of a project like this, and that is usually why I do ask to help support the farm through the Patreon. Basically because I get to do some of these experiments, you get to learn about it without you having to deal with some of the expenses of doing some of these. So I greatly appreciate if you help support the channel through Patreon. This is the design that I came up with. Now you can buy Venturis on Amazon and other places, but I decided to do my own, just streamline a few things. Plus I can print this out for about 40 or 50 cents in resin versus $10 a piece. And you'll see later on my final design has a lot of them, so I don't want to spend a couple $100 on Venturis. This is a cross section of it. Water comes in, gets restricted down through. Through that restriction is where the air comes in, because a low pressure spot is created through here as the opening starts up again. So it just sucks air right in through it. This was the first design that I came up with. I did settle on a second one, but all my testing was done with this one. And it starts off with a manifold that's roughly 8 feet wide. It has 10 Venturi holes in there, and then I just put a main pump on it. Each nozzle is screwed into the main manifold and has a little tube that goes to the air part of it, and then each tube then goes into a fitting that screws into a piece of 1/2-inch manifold, which is used for the air intake. Then that goes off over to the side and has a snorkel tube that comes up and out of the water. That whole assembly is then placed into deep water culture bed, and the aim was to just put a whole series of these going down the entire bed, but you can see that there's going to be a lot of them. And I also started to get a little concerned about the snorkels sticking up along the sides, because if you're pushing rafts down through here, that snorkel will get snagged on the raft as it passes by it. So even though I'm going to test with this, I opted not to go with this design. Taking a look at the bill of materials, the total price comes to be $185.75, with the bulk of that being the price of the pump. I did come up with a second design that's similar, that uses a larger, more expensive pump to get some more flow, but it is pumping into 20 nozzles instead of the 10. So this brought the price per nozzle from $18.57 down to $12.37. So it's a fairly substantial savings if you were going to do a larger system. Just put a larger pump in and spread it out over the 20 nozzles instead. So just so I could test out this nozzle, I just jury-rigged up a tube to one of my pumps. I'll set the pump on the slowest setting. This one is way overkill for this one little pipe, but it's the smallest pump that I have. And just put a little snorkel tube on this, and we'll drop this in and see how it works. I can see all the comments already coming in on how horrible it is to have this much sediment on the bottom of my bed, but that's the way life is. I haven't had a lot of time to do a big clean out. This is 3 years worth of sediment, so it's gonna add up. This is doing a really good job getting some air in there, so initial test looks pretty good. It's really hard to focus underneath the water, but that blasted out a section that's about 3 feet, so it has some pretty good current underneath there. So let's take a dive underwater and see what it looks like down there. So let's get some sediment. We'll get it into the pump and make sure that this thing doesn't clog at all. I was curious to see how much air this was sucking through it, so the best solution I could find was to take an old Skippy jar, put the tube up inside of it and set it right at the surface of the water, and then it'll suck the air out and actually draw the water up inside of the Skippy jar. You can see it going up here. If I left it like this, it's not a really fair comparison, because as it's lifting the water up, it's actually creating a vacuum inside of this, making it harder for it to suck the air out. So as long as I keep the water level about the same as the grow bed, I should be able to time it to see how long it takes the air to get taken out of this Skippy jar. I've already drilled my holes in the main manifold, so I'm just gonna tap these. I've done a lot of projects where I just will thread holes right into the plastic instead of buying fittings and couplings and whatnot that are threaded. I just find it so much easier to do this, especially for low pressure applications like this. It's cheaper, very accurate, saves on a lot of parts. It really doesn't take any much longer to tap and thread a hole than it does to try to glue up parts. And I probably could get away with making this manifold smaller, but the pump is 1.5 inches, and then I could probably go down to 1.25 inch piping, which is pretty standard in the US for some stuff, but more fittings are available in the 1.5 inch. I think the 1 inch would probably be a little too restrictive in the main manifold, so we're gonna stick to the 1.5 inch. It just makes it easier, especially with the tapping through the sidewall. It makes it nice too. Now, where each of these manifolds connect into the T for the pump, I'm not gonna glue these into place. They'll just be dry fit, and then I'm gonna drive a screw through it. And that will allow me, if I really want to down the road, to take these and twist them up or down to change the flow. For right now, we're gonna experiment with it coming perfectly straight out. So jam them in like this. That's the wrong screwdriver. We got lucky, I found an old beat up one down here. So. I've already drilled and tapped all the holes in the air manifold, so it just needs its little elbow fitting in here. That's about it. And this is just gonna sit on here. I think I'll throw a couple cable ties on it just to hold it together a little bit. Little piece of tubing to connect the air manifold to each Venturi. These won't need a clamp or anything. It'll just be a waste of clamps. No high pressure, no nothing through it. Throw on our snorkel tube here on the end, and we're just about all set. We just need the pump now. Alright, we're gonna drop this in. There's a lot of debris in the bottom of this bed, so the first time I fire this up, it's going to make a pretty good mess in here. Alright, let's try the old suction trick here and see how fast it does it. I made a sizable investment in a really nice dissolved oxygen sensor because I wanted to see how much this really does work or not. So we're going to drop that in and we're going to measure from a few different spots in here. So I'm going to do one right where the bubbles are coming out and then move it down the bed in different increments. I'll save the aggravation of everybody asking how I'm measuring the dissolved oxygen. This is a Walchem W600 controller, and I have it set up with a few different sensors. One is pH, so I'm currently at 6.72. Connectivity, so 648 microsiemens. Temperature of the water is currently 73.5. And the dissolved oxygen is coming in at 80.4%. Just a quick note on these graphs. The scale for the percentage of dissolved oxygen doesn't go from 0 to 100. I just zoomed in on the graphs so you could see the total differential from the max and min values. This graph shows 6 days of history on the system, and what's interesting about it is that the dissolved oxygen fluctuates quite a bit even without adding any oxygen into the system. And that's primarily due to the amount of sunlight that the system receives. So the light's hitting some of the algae, it's letting off some oxygen, and then that night that oxygen level goes back down again. So based off of that, I had to find a certain time where I could do some comparisons where I knew the oxygen levels were going to stay fairly consistent. So I basically am doing all my readings at night, and this graph shows during the course of several hours over the night that the O2 levels do stay fairly consistent. So this chart shows I had the dissolved oxygen sensor about a foot away from the output of the nozzles, and right at midnight the system turns on, and you can see that the O2 levels go up very quickly, and then I turn the system off after 3 hours, and then they of course drop fairly quickly. One thing that is interesting is that the dissolved oxygen levels do stay up a little bit higher afterwards, so there is still some suspended within the water and it hasn't just all come out of the system. The next night I put the sensor 3 feet away so I could see the dissolved oxygen levels once it started getting away from the nozzles. And it's not quite as high, but it did pretty well a few feet away. I then did the test again at 7 feet away and then 11 feet away just to see how much the dissolved oxygen levels taper out as it starts to go downstream more. One thing to note is that my readings are as a percentage, and they should be converted to parts per million. It seems the level over 7 parts per million is preferred for good plant health and over 5 parts per million for proper fish health. This value can change dramatically depending on the water temperature, with a slight effect from atmospheric pressure. Instead of the H-shaped system, I changed the design so that it now has a very long pipe. The first section is a 2-inch piece, it goes through a reducer and then down to 1.5 inches, and that's just to help keep the pressure equal throughout the entire system. The cost of the bill of material drops by about $15, mainly because I got rid of all those T-fittings that are on here. And the pump's on one end, so I can drop that into the grow bed on the end, and the snorkel just sits on the end, so that won't interfere with any of the rafts as they're getting pushed around. So then when it's sitting in the bed, it just runs down along the long side of it. And this one's about 20 feet. My beds are almost 100 feet, but this is a good start to see how it goes. And then I can also make up a second one and just put it on the opposite side if I wanted to have dual 20-foot long sections. I think that'll provide enough oxygen on that end of the bed where there won't be a problem. And if I do need more, I can drop 2 others in on the far side of the bed. So here's the long one. I have a nozzle set every 12 inches and the whole thing's about 20 feet long, so it's got 20 nozzles in it. This is sort of a two-person job. Here goes the first startup. It's probably going to stir up a lot of debris, so we may not even see it once it's running. Overall, it looks really good. All the nozzles are functioning. Looks like pretty good airflow. I'll do my test on it again. What I do like to see is overall, along the surface, you can see the patches of algae across the entire 8 feet wide of the bed. Everything is moving around, so just having that one set along the side is at least circulating the water throughout the entire width of the bed. Now that everything has settled out in here, you can get a pretty good look of where the stronger currents are coming out of these nozzles. It doesn't let much settle in front of it. Of course, in the center of the bed, it still settles in. So that's about it for this video. I really won't know the true results of this project until next season. We're in the fall now, so I've been slowing down the growing of the system. We're getting into cooler weather. So we'll find out next spring and summer how well this setup actually works. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.